I've got this Titan multi-tool which I bought from Screwfix about 6 years ago, and it's been stored in a shed for a while, but it's been a fair amount of use. I haven't taken the best care of it, like a lot of people. It's kind of, been brought out to be used as and when, and it got increasingly hard to start. It got to the point where eventually it was just wouldn't start at all. So I did a bit of digging and I wondered if it could be serviced or maintained or whatever. And I found this brilliant video from Mick on Mighty Mick's Mowers, which I will share the link to below. And he basically goes step by step through how to fix it. So this is essentially me proving that anyone can do what he's done. I've got the carburettor, which Mick recommends. It's about £6 off of eBay. This is a new priming bulb, not for this carburettor, but for the one that's actually on there. So one of the things that's gone wrong with this, in fact the main thing that's gone wrong, is the priming bulb is completely perished. So it's also never had a service at all, never had a new spark plug, new fuel filter, nothing. So I've actually got a new fuel filter assembly as well. You can buy those online very cheaply. A new spark plug, and the type, it took a while to figure that one out. It's RCJ6Y by Champion. I believe the R stands for resistor, which means it essentially inhibits the electrical noise that comes off it, meaning it won't interfere with your radio, that sort of thing. So I shouldn't need this. This is just backup, and if the diaphragms have gone on my carburettor, as I suspect they have, in the same way that Mick said that he thought his gone, then I can get those diaphragms replaced and I'll have a backup essentially. And I've also got a replacement spark plug cap, as you can see, and this always bothered me when I kept this in the shed. I think a mouse tried to actually eat through that. The links for all of these will be in the description, and of course everything's sitting on top of kind of like a universal air filter material, which the air filter sits under here. I'm going to cut out a replacement one of those. Basically I'm going to give the whole thing a complete service. I don't think it's got engine oil in it, so I don't think I can do an oil change. I think it's got a dry sump, so basically replacing everything that could possibly go. And you can see these fuel lines are very old, so we'll completely replace them and put a new carb on, which has the priming bulb underneath, which should hopefully work really well. The tools that I took from Mighty Mick's video that I think you need are a decent flat bladed screwdriver, which I've got here, a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, an 8mm nut runner. You need a Torx screwdriver to take these out. They're all the same size. There's one just here, one here, one here, and then there's this fourth one over here as well. So first thing to do is get the drill out with the Torx bit and take the top of the air filter out as well. That's just the number 2 Phillips, so they come off very easily. Here's the air filter element. It's very small, as you can see. I'll take the air filter element out. As you can see, it's not that bad, but it's probably worthy of replacing. It's the same thickness as the stuff I've got there, which is happy coincidence, because this is the only universal air cleaner filter I could find. In here you can see it's pretty gunky, so I'm going to give that a decent clear out. Yeah, this comes off, as you can see, it's a couple of nuts. I'm just going to take this one off with an 8mm nut runner, I believe. That does turn, so let's just see if that should be okay. And the nut comes off there. Underneath appears to be a washer. That's an 8. There we go. And again, that's come off. That's the nut there, and then underneath the nut is a washer. And remember, Mick, he couldn't quite remember if it was a washer and a spring or a spring and a washer. It's definitely the washer that goes on top, directly under the nut, and then the spring goes underneath. The spring is in direct contact with the choke itself. So now should be able to pull that off. Yep, that's come off quite nicely. A little bit corroded, so I'll probably give that a clean up. And underneath you can see the old carburettor. We'll pull that up in a moment. I did undo all the Torx screws in the 4 screws that I showed you earlier, so this should now just pull off. And of course the only thing holding it now is this kind of fuel assembly here. Now this should obviously be connected to the fuel tank, so probably just remove this all together and start with the fresh hoses in a moment. So I'm going to have a clean up, pull this all off, and then I'll explain what I've found in a moment. Okay, so that's gone really well. The priming input there, it didn't come off with long nose pliers. In the end I just used a flathead screwdriver to sort of just leave that off. Very perished rubber really, so that's come off anyway. And here you can see this little bit of fuel hose here for the main fuel flow. That's also come off the same way. It's got this little bit of heat protective sleeve, which obviously is important. I also found on the lid when I took this off that there's this little bit of foil. That's really critical, because that protects this bit of plastic from heat from the engine, and you might use a bit of aluminium foil tape if that is completely gone. In terms of getting the carb off itself, it was pretty straightforward because it's never been touched ever. This little lug here was really quite well ingrained in there. It did take a bit of jiggling around, and a flat head screwdriver, just tweaking this around a little bit, that sort of freed it up, and then a pair of long nose pliers pulled it out, and to get this to rotate I had to put a flat head screwdriver in there, so you just push it around like that, and then you get your finger in, and then you can hold it open long enough to get a pair of long nose pliers onto that and pull it off. So that's now everything off the carb, so the carb is now ready to come off. The only other thing I wanted to mention was here you can see how it's got the main shaft of the adjuster, and then it's got the lock nut of the adjuster. I just undid the adjuster very slightly, like 1/8 of a turn, just enough to loosen it so that this could then come undone. You just do that with your fingers, it's very loose. That way you don't lose the adjustment that's been put into the cable before. When you put the new one on, it might be totally different, but at least you've got a guide of what it was on the old one, and that's really worth remembering, I think. So now I'm going to pull the carb off, and then we'll get into the replacing the filter and the rubber pipe from the fuel tank. And the top of the fuel tank there just needed a pair of long nose pliers on here just to squeeze that together, pull it out. If you look inside there, you can see that is actually the old fuel line, and you can just see there at the bottom there, the filter, that's just literally gone loose. So it's obviously perished just here and fallen in. So we've got the new one here, which will obviously fix that. I'm going to fish that out now and try and figure out how to get the new line in. I'll come back to you in a moment. Given it a good clean up now, and I just took this flame-proof barrier here, just took that off of here. If you just look down that bore there, just about see the piston there for the engine. In terms of getting the rubber bung out of here, this is what I took out. It was all completely perished. Just needed finger force, honestly. So one finger sort of inside pushing that way, and then another finger just down here, just pulling on the edge of it. Came out quite easily. From what I can see, the replacement really should be pretty straightforward, in fact, because it's the perfect replacement. It's even got the rubber bung and everything. It might be a bit tighter, but I'm hoping that will fit in quite nicely. In fact, if I start it one-handed, you can see that's a really easy start there. So I'll get that in, get this flame-proof barrier back on, and start to see if we can get the new carb in. Then we'll move on to air filter and spark plug. Okay, so flame-proof barrier back on, everything's cleaned up. Heat-resistant sleeving back on the fuel lines there. I've removed the throttle adjuster that comes with the carb, as Mick said. They all come with it, and you should keep the old one if you can, just to keep things as original as possible. And then there's these two pipes on the bottom here. I haven't yet figured out which is which, so I'll figure that out in a moment. Obviously the priming bulb's there. The new fuel line went in ever so easy, actually. It was tight, but what I did was started on the left, pushed that in so the right was protruding, and then I got a flat bladed screwdriver, really pushed hard on that side. That meant that this semicircle was all in pretty tight, but the bottom wasn't. So what I then did was I just twisted it. I twisted it like that, and that was enough to just pull the whole thing in. A bit like putting on a motorbike tyre, for those of you that have done that. So that's it now. I'm going to put the new carb on. It's very obvious which way round it goes, because there's a little hole just there, which actually lines up with this little hole just here. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is the adjuster has to be on this side. So it wouldn't be the other way around and the adjuster be over there. That would be ridiculous. So it has to be this way around. So that's quite easy to figure out. So I'll put it on, I'll figure out which fuel line goes on where and what they do, and I'll be back in a moment. So I did just adjust the throttle. Essentially, when you pull the throttle, you can see the carburetor open and close there. What you want is so that there's just the tiniest amount of play. So I'm just squeezing the throttle a tiny bit, but as you can see, I'm pulling it just ever so slightly now, but it's not moving. And now obviously it's opening, so just the tiniest amount of play. That's now locked off, so you, like Mick said, you have an 8mm on here and a 10mm spanner on there, and then you can lock those off. In terms of these rubber pipes, it's really straightforward. Mick also mentioned on his video there's a larger and a smaller pipe. So this bottom one is the larger pipe. That is the one where the fuel comes from, so that's the one attached to the filter down there. And this other one, the smaller one, is actually fuel return, so that's when there's enough fuel in the carburetor, and it then flows back into the fuel chamber there. So that's the open-ended line just there. So that's the narrower one, that's the wider one, so that's quite easy to figure out. Obviously the adjuster for the idle speed is just there. Just need a flat bladed screwdriver to adjust that, and as far as I remember, Mick said it just needs backing off a quarter of a turn also, so we'll see if that rings true. So now I'm going to cut out fresh air filter element, and we'll put that on, and then we'll move on to the spark plug. And the top of the carburetor holder is back on now, 2.8mm nuts holding it on, and the spring underneath the washer there to put some pressure on the choke. Obviously the tighter you go, the more resistance you're going to get on the choke. I've put mine in fairly hard, and that seems to be quite a nice resistance. Obviously I've put a little bit of grease in there, just silicone grease, just to give it some lubrication. Now the one thing that's caught me out here is this hole here. In that hole there's supposed to be a nut, and that nut is what engages with the screw on the air filter housing. You'll notice that the air filter housing now has a new air filter. It's not my neatest ever cutout, but that's all ready to go now. But I've lost the nut. That nut has fallen out when I took it off initially, so I have to do a bit of digging and try and find that little 8mm nut to screw the air filter back on. Once I've found that, we can put the air filter housing back on the top. And then I'm going to give the fuel tank a quick clean out. There's just a tiny bit of debris. I should probably have done that before, but there's only a tiny few little bits and pieces. Then we'll do the spark plug and the spark plug cap, and then we'll be good to go. So that's in now, the nut's right in there, and the screw's gone all the way in. That's probably the most fiddliest part, and the way I had to do it in the end was I got the nut and I held it, because it's a nylon nut. Obviously it's got the flats on the side of it, and then it's got a little curved bit where the nylon is. See where the blue nylon is? Yeah, that's tiny little smooth bit which does not have the flats on it. And I put my long nose pliers on the smooth bit, held it slightly in place, and then just kind of moved it around slightly. And then in the end, just holding a flat blade screwdriver on it just gave me just enough tension to then use the cross-headed screwdriver and go in from the other side with the bolt. So that's in now, it's nice and secure. Now onto the very, very eaten, degraded, perished spark plug cap and spark plug. So the spark plug cap, you can see it's got a wide fitting on the metal clip which goes onto the top of the spark plug. And of course spark plugs, generally speaking, like if you've got one on your car or on your motorbike, they generally have this little bit of metal here which can be unscrewed, and in fact there's usually like a male thread underneath that which is used for attaching spark plug caps like this. So the replacement one that I've bought is in fact for the male thread. Now I tried undoing the bit of metal at the top of my new spark plug, and unfortunately it won't undo because it's not supposed to. So that does rather show that I need a new spark plug cap which uses this more positive type of fitting. So for now I'm just going to have to use the old slightly eaten one, and we'll have to make do with that for the moment. To undo the old spark plug, it's just a 19mm ring spanner. Okay, so the old plug's out. I'm just looking inside the piston, inside the cylinder there. You can see the piston's quite coked up there. Could possibly do with cleaning off if we were really going for it, but it'll be okay. The sides of the cylinder, I'm not sure if you can see the sides of the cylinder, but they're pretty shiny. They're pretty fine. The old spark plug, as you'd expect, is quite coked up as well. The new one obviously is preset and nice and clean, so we'll put that in. Okay, so that's the new spark plug in, and the spark plug cap on, and it literally just what's doing up to sort of normal hand tightness, and then about between 1/8 and 1/4 of a turn in addition, just to nip it up slightly. So now that's done, we can put the plastic housing on and fire it up. So I've just got to do these screws up. Okay, so fuel tank all cleaned out. It might seem a bit picky because there were only a few little tiny bits in there, but the tiniest fragment, if it got past the fuel filter, got into the carb, would completely block the tiny little jet that's inside the carb there. So it really is important to keep the fuel tank inside at least absolutely immaculate. So gave it a quick clean up with some petrol, filled it up, got the got the lid back on. So now I'm just going to give the carb a prime, 6 pumps of the primer bulb down there. There we go, you can see it returning back to the fuel tank, so that's properly primed. So there we go, it started third pull, absolutely magnificent. It is just ticking over probably slightly too fast, so I will just adjust that down a little bit, but other than that, really, really happy. Good job, well done. Thanks very much, Mick, your instructions are really helpful. I've got all the multi-tools that came with it in this bag. As you can see, some holes in the end. That's actually where the mouse, which ate through the spark plug cap on the actual motor, actually ate into the bag. I'm going to replace the bag with a generic tent carrier bag from Amazon. Get about 10-15 pounds I think, and it's much smarter and more rugged as well. Probably easy to carry too, and it'll probably take the cutter as well. It's quite big. And I'm also going to just in a moment just pull the carb apart just to see if the diaphragm was okay in that. I suspect not, and it'll just be a case of undoing these 4 screws and having a look. So we're back in a tick. We've got the pruner attachment on the end there. As you can see, it's not moving. Give it a bit of throttle. Hope that helps. Do please leave a comment below if you've got any questions or any constructive feedback. Constructive feedback respectfully delivered is a gift. I truly believe that, and I'm very, very grateful for all of your comments. Also, please consider subscribing. I will be sure to upload more videos, and be sure to press the bell icon so that you get notified every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching. Take care.